The blood on Marcus DeVane's hands had dried brown by the time he reached the Chicago River, but he could still feel it sticky between his fingers, warm as it had been 20 minutes ago when it was still inside his wife. He stood at the edge of the water, the October wind cutting through his UPS uniform, and wondered if jumping in would wash away what he'd done, or if some stains went deeper than skin. Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're watching from. It helps us know how far these stories reach. Please, subscribe to Crime Echo and hit the like button, which is our main support. 3 days earlier, Marcus had been a different man. He'd been the kind of husband who kissed his wife goodbye every morning at 5:30, who brought home flowers on Fridays, who believed that 13 years of marriage meant something unbreakable. He worked the early shift at the UPS distribution center on Pershing Road, sorting packages in the pre-dawn darkness, his hands moving with the mechanical precision of someone who'd done the same job for a decade. The work was monotonous, but it was honest. It paid the bills. It kept their 2-bedroom apartment in Bridgeport warm and their refrigerator full. More than that, it gave Marcus something he'd never had growing up on the South Side: stability. His wife, Cassandra, worked at a dental office in Lincoln Park, answering phones and scheduling appointments. She had a laugh that could fill a room, the kind that made strangers turn their heads and smile without knowing why. That laugh was what had first caught Marcus's attention 15 years ago at a house party in Englewood. She'd been standing by the kitchen counter, head thrown back, that sound pouring out of her like music, and Marcus had walked straight to her without thinking, without planning what he'd say. "I need to know what's so funny," he told her, and she'd looked at him with those amber eyes and said, "Life. Everything. You." And somehow that had been the start of everything. They'd dated for 2 years before Marcus proposed. He'd saved up for 6 months to buy the ring, a modest diamond that caught the light just right. He'd taken her to Navy Pier at sunset, gotten down on one knee near the Ferris wheel, while tourists took pictures and children ran past with cotton candy. She'd said yes before he could even get the question out, jumping into his arms with that laugh spilling out again. And Marcus had felt like the luckiest man in Chicago. The first few years of marriage had been good, better than good. They'd moved into their apartment, a walk-up with creaky floors and a radiator that clanged at night, but it was theirs. Cassandra hung curtains and painted the kitchen walls a soft yellow. Marcus built bookshelves in the living room, even though neither of them read much. They were playing house, building a life, and it felt real and solid. But somewhere around year 8, things started to shift. Marcus couldn't pinpoint exactly when. Maybe it was when Cassandra started working longer hours, coming home after 9 with excuses about inventory and scheduling conflicts. Maybe it was when she started going to the gym 4 times a week, wearing new workout clothes that showed off the body she was sculpting. Maybe it was when she stopped laughing as much, or when her laugh started sounding different, tighter, like it was meant for someone else. Marcus told himself he was being paranoid. Marriage went through phases. People changed. He'd read articles online about keeping the spark alive, about date nights and communication. He tried. He planned a weekend trip to Milwaukee that Cassandra canceled because of work. He made dinner reservations at a steakhouse downtown that she forgot about. He bought lingerie that stayed in the box on her side of the closet. "You're being clingy," she told him one night when he asked if everything was okay. They were lying in bed, backs to each other, the space between them feeling like miles. "I'm just tired, Marcus. Work is stressful. Can you give me some space?" So he gave her space. He threw himself into his job, picking up extra shifts, volunteering for the weekend routes. His supervisor, a gruff man named Kowalski, who'd been with UPS for 30 years, noticed. "You trying to make the rest of us look bad, DeVane?" He'd joked, but there was approval in his eyes. Marcus became the guy who never called in sick, who always showed up early, who took the routes nobody wanted. His best friend, Trevor Baines, noticed too. Trevor had been in Marcus's life since middle school, one of those friendships that survived everything. Different high schools, Marcus's marriage, Trevor's 3 failed relationships. Trevor worked construction, had shoulders like a linebacker, and an easy grin that made people trust him instantly. He'd been the best man at Marcus's wedding, had helped them move into their apartment, had spent countless Sunday afternoons watching Bears games in their living room while Cassandra made nachos and complained about football. "You good, man?" Trevor asked one evening when they met for drinks at a sports bar in Pilsen. It was a Thursday, one of the few nights Marcus wasn't working late. "You look like shit." Marcus had laughed, but it came out hollow. "Just tired. You know how it is. It's Cassie, isn't it?" Trevor leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Things still rough?" Marcus didn't want to talk about it, but the beer was loosening his tongue. "I don't know what's going on with her. She's different, distant. I feel like I'm living with a stranger." Trevor nodded slowly, his expression troubled. "Have you talked to her about it?" "Every time I try, she shuts down, says I'm imagining things, that she's just stressed." Marcus finished his beer, signaled for another. "Sometimes I wonder if there's someone else." The words hung between them, heavy and dark. Trevor's face did something Marcus couldn't quite read, a flicker of something that might have been guilt or fear or both. But then Trevor reached across the table and gripped Marcus's shoulder. "Don't go down that road, brother. That kind of thinking will eat you alive. Cassie loves you. She married you. Maybe you just need to give it time." Marcus wanted to believe him. God, he wanted to believe him. So he pushed the suspicions down, buried them under work and routine and the daily grind of keeping a life together. But the universe has a way of forcing truth into the light. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before Halloween, when Marcus's world cracked open. He'd called in sick for the first time in 2 years, not because he was actually sick, but because he'd barely slept the night before. Cassandra had come home at 11:30, smelling like wine and something else, something musky and unfamiliar. When he'd asked where she'd been, she'd snapped at him about a work event, about how she didn't need to check in like a child, and then she'd locked herself in the bathroom for an hour. Marcus had lain awake listening to the shower run, feeling his gut twist with a dread he couldn't name. By morning, he felt hollowed out, so he'd called Kowalski, invented a stomach bug, and tried to sleep. He woke up around noon to his phone buzzing, a text from Trevor. "You around today? Need to talk about something." Marcus stared at the message, something cold settling in his chest. Trevor never texted in the middle of the day. He was always on job sites, too busy to check his phone. Marcus texted back, "Homesick, what's up?" The response came fast. "NVM, we'll catch up later. Feel better." It should have been nothing, a non-conversation. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He got out of bed, pulled on jeans and a hoodie, and stood in the middle of his empty apartment trying to decide what to do. That's when he saw it, Cassandra's iPad sitting on the kitchen counter, screen dark but not locked. She'd left in a hurry that morning, running late, and she'd forgotten it. Marcus had never gone through her things before. He believed in privacy, in trust, in the boundaries that kept a marriage healthy, but something, instinct, desperation, fate, made him pick up the tablet. He knew her passcode, their anniversary. 084. The screen lit up, showing her last opened app. Messages. Marcus's hands started shaking before he even read anything. The preview on the screen showed a conversation with a contact listed only as T, when the most recent message, sent at 10:20 p.m. the night before, read, "Tonight was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you." Marcus clicked on the conversation. The messages went back months, hundreds of them. Texts that grew from friendly to flirtatious to explicit. Photos. God, photos of his wife that he'd never seen. Angles he'd never photographed. expressions she'd never worn for him, and responses. Responses from T that were graphic and possessive and full of promises. Marcus read them all, every single one. He sat at the kitchen table and scrolled through months of betrayal, watching his marriage disintegrate into pixels and words. His hands stopped shaking after a while. His breathing evened out. He felt himself going numb, like his body was shutting down to protect him from the weight of what he was learning. The messages weren't just about sex. They were about love, about plans. "When are you going to leave him?" T had asked 2 weeks ago. "I'm working on it," Cassandra had replied. "I need to do it the right way. He doesn't deserve to be blindsided." Marcus almost laughed at that. Didn't deserve to be blindsided. He scrolled further back, looking for the beginning, trying to understand when this started. 6 months ago, he found. The first message from T was friendly, casual. "Hey, it was good seeing you yesterday. We should do that again sometime." And Cassandra's response, "Definitely. It's been too long." Something about the phrasing nagged at Marcus. It's been too long. Like they knew each other from before. Like this wasn't a new connection, but a rekindled one. He went to her contacts list, scrolled to T. The full name wasn't listed, just the initial. But there was a phone number. Marcus stared at it, his mind working slowly through the fog of shock. That number looked familiar. He'd seen it before, called it before. With trembling fingers, Marcus opened his own contacts list. Scrolled to Trevor Baines. Compared the numbers. They matched. The apartment tilted. Marcus gripped the edge of the table, his vision blurring. Trevor. His best friend since they were 13 years old. Trevor, who'd stood beside him at his wedding. Trevor, who'd spent years in their home, at their table, drinking their beer and eating their food. Trevor, who'd sat across from him 3 weeks ago and told him not to go down the road of suspicion. That Cassandra loved him. Marcus made a sound he didn't recognize, something between a sob and a growl. He stood up so fast the chair fell over. The iPad clattered to the floor. He paced the apartment, hands in his hair, trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to process the magnitude of this betrayal. How long had they been laughing at him? How many times had Trevor sat on his couch, shook his hand, called him brother, while sleeping with his wife? How many of those late, work nights had been spent in Trevor's bed? How many lies had Cassandra told while looking him in the eyes? Marcus picked up his phone. He started to call Trevor, then stopped. Started to call Cassandra, then stopped. He couldn't think straight. His mind was a white-hot mess of rage and grief and something darker, something that whispered about justice and consequences. He went back to the iPad, to the messages. Read the most recent ones again. Last night, the night Cassandra had come home late, they'd made plans. "Tomorrow at 4, Trevor had written. "The same place. I've been counting the hours." "Yes," Cassandra had replied, followed by a heart emoji. "I'll tell him I have a late appointment." Tomorrow. Today. The same place. Marcus checked the earlier messages, looking for clues. 3 weeks ago, he found it. "The motel off I-55 again?" Cassandra had written. "Room 23. I'll get there first," Trevor had replied. A motel off I-55. Marcus knew the area. He drove past it sometimes on his routes. A run-down place called the Starlight Inn, the kind of establishment that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions. He looked at the time. 12:47 p.m. If they were meeting at 4, he had time. Time to plan, time to think, time to decide what he was going to do. But Marcus didn't want to think. Thinking would make him reconsider. Thinking would make him doubt. He went to the bedroom, changed out of his hoodie into his UPS uniform. The brown shirt and pants felt like armor, like they could protect him from the person he was about to become. He looked at himself in the mirror, a 38-year-old man with tired eyes and a trusting heart that had just been shattered, and didn't recognize what he saw. In the back of the closet, buried under old winter coats, was a lockbox. Inside was a 9mm handgun Marcus had bought 5 years ago after a string of break-ins in the neighborhood. He'd never fired it outside the range, had almost forgotten it was there. He took it out now, checked the magazine, chambered around with movements that felt automatic and disconnected from his racing thoughts. The drive to the Starlight Inn took 35 minutes. Marcus parked in a corner of the lot with a clear view of the entrance and waited. The motel was exactly as depressing as he'd imagined. 2 stories of peeling paint and flickering neon, with an office that looked abandoned and cars parked at odd angles in front, of rooms with drawn curtains. This was where his wife came to betray him. This was where his best friend came to destroy everything. At 3:47, a red Honda Civic pulled into the lot. Cassandra's car. Marcus watched her get out, looking around nervously before walking to room 23. She was wearing a blue dress he'd never seen before, her hair down the way she used to wear it when they first met. She knocked twice, and the door opened immediately. Trevor. Tall, broad-shouldered Trevor with his construction worker arms and his easy smile. The smile he'd used to lie to Marcus's face. Trevor pulled Cassandra inside. The door closed. The curtain stayed drawn. Marcus sat in his truck for 10 minutes, the gun heavy in his lap. He kept telling himself to drive away, to call a lawyer, to handle this like a civilized person. But civilized felt like a costume he'd been wearing too long. Underneath was something rawer, something that had been building since he'd read those messages, since he'd compared those phone numbers, since he'd understood the full scope of their betrayal. He got out of the truck. The walk to room 23 felt long and short at the same time, like he was moving through syrup and at light speed simultaneously. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, feel the weight of the gun tucked into his waistband. When he reached the door, he heard sounds from inside. Laughter. His wife's laugh, the one he'd fallen in love with, now directed at someone else. Murmurs of conversation he couldn't make out. Marcus didn't knock. He tried the handle. Unlocked. The door swung open. They were on the bed, tangled together. Cassandra saw him first. Her eyes went wide, her body freezing. "Marcus," she started, but he was already moving. Trevor sat up, confused, then alarmed. "Marcus, man, what are you—" "Shut up!" Marcus's voice didn't sound like his own. It was low and cold and dead. He pulled the gun from his waistband, held it steady despite the shaking in his hands. "Don't say a fucking word!" Cassandra scrambled off the bed, grabbing a sheet to cover herself. "Marcus, please, let me explain." "Explain?" The word came out like a laugh. "Explain how you've been fucking my best friend for 6 months. Explain how you've been planning to leave me. Explain how you looked me in the eyes every day and lied." Tears were streaming down Cassandra's face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just what?" Marcus stepped closer, the gun trained on Trevor now. Trevor had his hands up, his face pale. "It just happened. Is that what you're going to say? Like you tripped and fell onto his dick?" "Marcus, put the gun down." Trevor's voice was shaking. "We can talk about this. We can figure this out." "We?" Marcus felt something break inside him, like the last thread holding him together just snapped. "There is no we. You destroyed we. Both of you. You took everything I had and you threw it away like it meant nothing." "It meant something," Cassandra sobbed. "You meant something, but I fell in love with Trevor. I didn't want to. I tried to stop it, but I couldn't." The worst part was that she sounded sincere, like she really believed love was an excuse, like her feelings justified the destruction of his life. "How long?" Marcus asked, his eyes still on Trevor. "How long have you been planning to take my wife?" Trevor's jaw worked. For a moment, Marcus thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "It wasn't like that. We didn't plan anything. It just happened." She was unhappy, Marcus. She needed someone to talk to. And you just happened to be there. Marcus nodded slowly. My best friend, my brother, the person I trusted more than anyone. You saw my wife was vulnerable, and you took advantage. That's not fair, Trevor said, finding some courage. You weren't there for her. You were always working, always tired, always too busy. She was lonely. The accusation hit Marcus like a physical blow, because part of him wondered if it was true, if he'd failed somehow, if he'd pushed Cassandra away without realizing it. But then he remembered the messages, the explicit photos, the plans to leave him, and the guilt evaporated, replaced by something harder. You're right, Marcus said quietly. I was working. I was tired. I was too busy trying to provide for my family, trying to keep a roof over our heads, trying to be a good husband. That's my crime. Being human. Being imperfect. He looked at Cassandra now. But you know what I never did? I never lied. I never cheated. I never made plans to abandon you because things got hard. Cassandra's face crumpled. I know you didn't, and I hate myself for this, but I can't help how I feel. I love Trevor. The words were like bullets, each one finding its mark. Marcus felt himself splintering. Part of him wanted to drop the gun, walk away, let them have each other, let them live with what they'd done. But another part, the wounded, animal part, wanted them to hurt the way he was hurting, wanted them to understand that actions had consequences, that betrayal had a price. Tell me one thing, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you ever love me? Was any of it real? Cassandra hesitated, and that hesitation was answer enough. At first, she said finally, in the beginning, yes, I loved you so much. But people change, Marcus. I changed. What I needed changed. What you needed. Marcus tasted the words, bitter and wrong. What about what I needed? Did that ever matter? Of course it mattered. Then why? The question came out as a roar. Why wasn't I enough? Why wasn't 13 years of marriage, 13 years of loyalty, 13 years of love enough to make you come to me instead of him? Cassandra had no answer. She just stood there, crying, wrapped in a motel sheet, looking small and guilty and still somehow defiant. Marcus turned to Trevor. And you? Why? Trevor met his eyes. Because I love her too. I've always loved her, Marcus, since before you married her. I never said anything because she chose you. But when she came to me, when she told me she was unhappy, I couldn't turn her away. The admission was staggering. Trevor had loved Cassandra before the marriage, had stood beside Marcus at the altar knowing he wanted the bride for himself, had spent years hiding it, waiting, hoping. You're a coward, Marcus said flatly. If you loved her, you should have fought for her. Instead, you waited until we were married, until she was vulnerable, and you slithered in like a snake. Trevor's face hardened. I'm not the bad guy here, Marcus. You're the one holding a gun. He was right. Marcus was holding a gun. He was standing in a motel room threatening two people who had betrayed him. In the eyes of the law, he was the criminal now. But in the eyes of something older, something more primal, he was justice. You took everything from me, Marcus said, his voice cracking. My wife, my best friend, my future. You took it all and you didn't even have the decency to tell me. You let me live in ignorance, let me keep playing the fool. We were going to tell you, Cassandra said desperately. Soon! I was going to sit you down and explain everything. I didn't want you to find out like this. How did you find out? Trevor asked, his eyes narrowing. Marcus laughed, a bitter sound. You really want to know? I went through Cassandra's iPad, read all your messages, saw all the pictures, learned every dirty detail of your little affair. He saw the shame on their faces and felt a savage satisfaction. That's right. I know everything. Every lie, every meeting, Every time you laughed at me behind my back." "We never laughed at you," Cassandra protested. "We never thought this was funny. But you kept doing it." Marcus felt tears on his face now, hot and angry. "You kept lying, kept sneaking around, kept breaking your vows. So tell me, Cassie, when exactly were those vows supposed to stop mattering? When did 'till death do us part' become just words?" She had no answer. Neither did Trevor. They just stood there, caught, guilty, waiting to see what Marcus would do. For a long moment, Marcus didn't know himself. The gun felt alive in his hand, almost pulling toward them. It would be so easy. 2 shots. 2 lives ended. And then what? Prison? Death penalty? A life defined by this one moment of rage. But as Marcus stood there, he saw his future branching out in front of him. One path led to violence, to blood, to irreversible consequences. The other path led to divorce, to rebuilding, to eventually moving on. Both paths were painful, but only one made him a murderer. He started to lower the gun. That's when Cassandra moved. She took a step toward him, her hand outstretched. "Marcus, thank you. Thank you for being the bigger person. We can get through this. We can figure out how to—" "Don't," Marcus said sharply, raising the gun again. "Don't come near me. Don't touch me. Don't pretend like this is over." But Cassandra kept moving, kept talking, her voice rising in pitch. "Marcus, please, you're scaring me. Put the gun down. Let's talk about this like adults." Like adults. As if she had any right to lecture him about maturity. Marcus felt his control slipping. The numbness that had protected him was cracking, letting in all the rage and pain and betrayal. His vision tunneled. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Marcus, no!" Trevor shouted, moving toward him. Everything happened fast after that. Too fast. Trevor lunged. Marcus swung the gun toward him. Cassandra screamed. The gun went off. The sound was deafening in the small room. Marcus's ears rang. Smoke drifted from the barrel. He stood frozen, staring at what he'd done. Cassandra was on the floor, blood spreading across the white sheet, soaking it red. Her eyes were wide with shock and pain, her mouth moving, but no sound coming out. Trevor was beside her, pressing his hands to her chest, shouting something Marcus couldn't hear. Marcus looked down at the gun in his hand. He'd pulled the trigger, not intentionally, or had he? Everything was confused now, blurred. Had Trevor really lunged, or had Marcus's mind invented that? Had he meant to fire, or had his finger slipped? It didn't matter. The result was the same. Cassandra was dying on a motel room floor, and Marcus had killed her. Trevor's voice came back into focus. "Ambulance! Call an ambulance, you fucking psycho! She's bleeding out!" But Marcus couldn't move. He watched the blood pool, watched Cassandra's eyes glaze over, watched the life drain out of the woman he'd loved for 15 years. This wasn't justice. This wasn't revenge. This was just tragedy. When Trevor tried to grab his phone to call 911, something in Marcus snapped back to awareness. He couldn't let Trevor call. Not yet. Not until he understood what this meant, what he was going to do next. He raised the gun again. "Don't!" Trevor looked at him with pure hatred. "She's dying, Marcus. Let me call for help." "No." Marcus's voice was hollow. "It's too late for that." And it was. He could see it in Cassandra's face, the light fading, her chest barely moving, the blood still spreading. Trevor saw it too. Something broke in his expression. "You killed her. You fucking killed her." "You killed her," Marcus corrected quietly. "Both of you. When you decided to betray me. When you decided our friendship, our marriage, none of it mattered. This is on you." "That's bullshit and you know it." Trevor stood up, his hands covered in Cassandra's blood. "You're a murderer, Marcus. You're going to prison for the rest of your life." Marcus considered that. Prison. A cage. Years of being defined by this one moment. Years of reliving it, regretting it, hating himself for it. Unless there were no witnesses. The thought came to him cold and clear. Trevor was the only person who knew what happened in this room. If Trevor disappeared, if both of them disappeared, the story could be different. An affair gone wrong. A murder-suicide. Trevor killed Cassandra, then himself. Marcus, the grieving husband, left behind to pick up the pieces. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and meant it. Not sorry for what he was about to do, but sorry for what had been done to him. Sorry that it had come to this. Trevor saw the intention in his eyes. "Marcus, don't." The second shot was intentional. Trevor fell beside Cassandra, a red hole in his chest. He gasped, clawed at the floor, his eyes locked on Marcus's. "Why?" he managed to choke out. "Because you took everything," Marcus said, "and I have nothing left to lose." He stood over them as they died, his wife and his best friend, the two people who'd meant the most to him in the world. Now, just bodies on a cheap motel carpet. Marcus felt empty, not satisfied, not justified, just empty. He wiped the gun clean, placed it in Trevor's hand, arranged the scene to look like a confrontation. Then he walked out of room 23, got in his truck, and drove. He ended up at the Chicago River, watching the water move, the gun back in his possession, the blood still on his hands. He'd left the carefully staged scene behind, but he knew it wouldn't hold. Police would find inconsistencies. Forensics would tell the real story. Eventually, someone would figure it out. Marcus thought about throwing himself in, ending it before the law caught up. But he was too much of a coward for that, so he stood there, frozen, waiting for sirens that would inevitably come. When his phone rang an hour later, he answered it without looking at the caller ID. "Mr. DeVane?" An unfamiliar voice. Official. Serious. "This is Detective Bradley with Chicago PD. I need you to come down to the station. There's been an incident involving your wife." "I know," Marcus said quietly. A pause. "You know? Sir, how would you know?" Marcus closed his eyes. "Because I was there." The confession came easier than he expected. At the station, he told them everything. The affair, the confrontation, the shots. He didn't try to justify it or spin it. He just told the truth. Detective Bradley, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, listened without expression. When Marcus finished, she sat back in her chair. "That's quite a story, Mr. DeVane. It's not a story, it's what happened. And you expect us to believe you just snapped, that you're not a cold-blooded killer who planned this?" Marcus shrugged. "Believe what you want. I'm telling you how it was." The trial took 8 months. Marcus's lawyer tried for a temporary insanity defense, but the prosecution painted him as a man who'd executed his wife and best friend in a jealous rage. The carefully staged scene at the motel worked against him. It showed premeditation, planning. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict. Guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. At sentencing, the judge looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity. Mr. DeVane, I understand that you were deeply hurt by the betrayal of your wife and friend. But nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies taking another person's life. You had options. You could have walked away. You chose violence instead." Marcus wanted to argue that he hadn't chosen anything, that the moment had chosen him. But he said nothing. "I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole for each count to be served concurrently." The gavel came down. Final. Absolute. In prison, Marcus had time to think. Too much time. He replayed that day endlessly, looking for the moment where he could have turned back. There were so many. The moment he picked up the iPad, the moment he loaded the gun, the moment he drove to the motel, the moment he opened the door. Any of those moments could have been different. Any of those choices could have saved them all. But Marcus had followed the path laid out by his pain, and it had led him here. To a cell. To a lifetime of regret. To the knowledge that he'd destroyed not only his wife and best friend, but himself. The other inmates gave him space. Word spread about what he'd done. Caught his wife cheating, killed her and her lover, and it earned him a certain respect in the twisted hierarchy of prison life. He was a man who'd stood up for himself, who'd defended his honor. They didn't see the nights he lay awake hating himself. They didn't see the way he still heard Cassandra's laugh in his dreams. 3 years into his sentence, Marcus received a letter. It was from Cassandra's sister, Monica, someone he'd barely known during the marriage. She wrote that she'd been going through Cassandra's belongings and found a journal. In it, Cassandra had written about the affair, about her confusion, about her guilt. But she'd also written about Marcus. "He's a good man," one entry read. "Maybe too good. I think that's why I can't tell him. Not because I'm afraid of what he'll do, but because I'm afraid of hurting him. He loves with his whole heart, and I'm about to break it." Another entry, dated a week before her death. "I've decided to end things with Trevor. It's not fair to any of us. Marcus deserves the truth and a chance to move on. I'm going to tell him this weekend. I'm terrified, but it's the right thing to do." Marcus read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it away. He didn't know if knowing this made things better or worse. Cassandra had been planning to end the affair, had been planning to tell him the truth. If he'd waited just a few more days, maybe everything would have been different. But he hadn't waited. He'd gone to that motel with a gun and rage and a need to hurt the people who'd hurt him. And now Cassandra would never have the chance to make things right. Neither would Trevor. And neither would Marcus. Years passed. Marcus grew older in prison, his dark hair going gray, his face developing lines that made him look harder than he'd ever been on the outside. He took classes, earned a degree in philosophy through a correspondence program. He read everything he could about betrayal, justice, revenge, forgiveness. He tried to understand why he'd done what he'd done. The philosophers had plenty to say. Some argued that his actions were the inevitable result of evolutionary psychology, men defending their mate choice, eliminating rival males. Others said it was a moral failing, a choice to elevate his own suffering above the value of human life. Still others suggested that society itself was to blame, teaching men that their worth was tied to their relationships, that betrayal was the ultimate insult. Marcus thought they were all right and all wrong. The truth was simpler and more complicated. He'd been hurt. He'd been broken. And in his brokenness, he'd lashed out with deadly force. It wasn't justified. It wasn't evolution or society or temporary insanity. It was just him, Marcus DeVane, making the worst decision of his life in the worst moment of his life. On the 15th anniversary of Cassandra's death, Marcus wrote a letter of his own. He addressed it to no one and everyone. He wrote about regret, about the weight of taking a life, about how justice and revenge were not the same thing. He wrote about how he'd give anything, his own life, his freedom, his soul, to go back to that day and choose differently. He ended the letter with a plea. "If you're reading this because you've been betrayed, because someone you love has hurt you beyond measure, please learn from my mistake. Walk away. The pain of betrayal is temporary. The consequences of murder are forever. Choose life. Choose healing. Choose anything but the path I chose." He gave the letter to the prison chaplain, a kind man named Father Gomez, who'd spent hours listening to Marcus's confessions and doubts. Father Gomez promised to share it, to use it in counseling sessions, to make sure Marcus's story served as a warning. It wasn't redemption. Marcus knew he'd never be redeemed. But maybe it was something. Maybe it was a small way of taking all this pain and suffering and turning it into something that could prevent another tragedy. On his 20-year anniversary in prison, Marcus received unexpected visitors. Trevor's parents, both elderly now, asked to see him. Marcus almost declined. What could he possibly say to them? But curiosity won out. They sat across from him in the visitors' room, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Trevor's mother had his eyes, the same hazel green that used to light up when he smiled. His father had his build, still strong despite his years. Finally, Trevor's mother spoke. "We didn't come here to forgive you. What you did was unforgivable." Marcus nodded. "I know. But we came here to tell you something." Trevor kept journals too. "We found them after everything. He wrote about you, about the guilt he felt, about how he knew what he was doing was wrong but couldn't stop himself." She paused, tears forming. "He wrote that he deserved whatever happened, that if you ever found out, he'd understand your anger." Trevor's father leaned forward. "He loved you, son. In his own twisted way, he loved you. He hated himself for betraying you. And I think part of him wanted to be caught, wanted it to end." Marcus didn't know what to do with that information. It didn't change what he'd done. It didn't bring anyone back. But it added another layer of tragedy to the whole mess. Trevor had been suffering too. They'd all been suffering, caught in a web of desire and loyalty and confusion. "I'm sorry," Marcus said, and meant it more deeply than he'd ever meant anything. "I'm sorry I took your son from you. I'm sorry I let my pain turn into violence. I'm sorry for all of it." Trevor's mother nodded, wiping her eyes. "We know, and we forgive you, even though we said we wouldn't, because holding on to hate has been killing us too. And we're tired. We're just so tired." They left shortly after, and Marcus returned to his cell. He sat on his bunk and thought about forgiveness, about whether he deserved it, whether it mattered. In the end, he decided that forgiveness from others was a gift, but not a necessity. The real question was whether he could forgive himself. The answer, he knew, was no, not completely, not ever. He would carry the weight of what he'd done until the day he died. That was his punishment, more lasting than the prison walls or the life sentence. He would live with the knowledge that he'd extinguished 2 lives because he couldn't contain his own pain. But maybe, and this was the thought that kept him going, maybe he could do enough good in the time he had left to balance the scales just a little. Maybe he could help other inmates work through their anger. Maybe he could counsel young men who came into the system full of rage about betrayal and hurt. Maybe he could be a living example of what not to do. It wasn't redemption, but it was purpose. And for a man serving life without parole, purpose was everything. 25 years after that October day at the Starlight Inn, Marcus DeVane sat in the prison library helping a 19-year-old named Dante with his GED prep. Dante was in for assault, had beaten his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend within an inch of his life. He reminded Marcus of himself, angry, hurt, convinced that violence was justice. "Why you helping me, old man?" Dante asked during a break. "What's in it for you?" Marcus set down the textbook and looked at the young man. "Nothing's in it for me. I'm trying to make sure you don't end up like me." "What's wrong with you? You seem all right." "I killed 2 people," Marcus said bluntly. "My wife and my best friend. I'm going to die in here. That's what's wrong with me." Dante's eyes widened. "Damn! What did they do?" "They betrayed me, broke my trust in the worst way possible, and I thought killing them would make the pain stop." Marcus shook his head. "It didn't. It just added guilt on top of the pain. Now I live with both, every day, for the rest of my life." "So what should I do?" Dante asked. "About the anger, I mean. It's still there. I still want to hurt people sometimes." "You sit with it," Marcus said. "You feel it. You let it burn through you. But you don't act on it. Because the temporary satisfaction of violence is not worth the permanent consequences. You hear me? Dante nodded slowly. I hear you. Good, Marcus said. Now let's get back to algebra, because the best revenge is living well, even if you're living it in here. As they worked through equations, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Not happiness, he'd lost the right to that, but contentment, a sense that maybe, just maybe, all this suffering could mean something, could prevent another young man from making the same mistakes, could turn a story of tragedy into a story of warning and wisdom. He would never leave this prison, would never taste freedom again, would never have another chance at love or friendship or the life he'd once taken for granted. But he could use his story, could transform his worst moment into a teaching tool. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all anyone could ask for after destroying so much. Not forgiveness, not redemption, just the opportunity to make the world slightly better than he'd left it. Marcus thought about Cassandra sometimes, about her laugh and her amber eyes, and the way she'd said yes before he could even propose. He thought about Trevor, about playing video games and watching football, and all the years of friendship that should have mattered more than desire. He thought about the man he'd been, trusting, loyal, devoted, and the man he'd become, broken, violent, murderous. And he lived with it all, every memory, every regret, every what if and should have, because that was his sentence, the real one. Not the prison walls, but the prison of his own conscience. The life sentence of knowing he'd taken the one path he could never walk back from. In the end, Marcus DeVane's story wasn't about justice or revenge or even love. It was about choice. The choice to trust or suspect. The choice to forgive or punish. The choice to walk away or pull the trigger. And once that choice was made, once the bullet left the chamber, everything else was just consequence. He'd chosen poorly, and now he lived forever with that choice, hoping that somewhere, someone would hear his story and choose differently. Choose mercy over vengeance. Choose healing over violence. Choose life. That hope was all Marcus had left, and he held on to it fiercely, desperately, like a drowning man holding on to driftwood in an endless sea of regret. Because without hope, there was only the darkness. And Marcus had seen enough darkness to last a dozen lifetimes. Without hope, there was only the darkness. And Marcus had seen enough darkness to last a dozen lifetimes.